Hello and welcome. I'm Tavaragadamu. Only 3.2% of the Korean War veterans of 1950 to 1953 are alive today. And one of them, Sam Gard, an American master sergeant who served with the 48th Field Artillery Battalion, has offered to share his thoughts on the Kanyo Battalion, the Ethiopian contingent that was deployed in the Korean Peninsula at the same time. And in breaking with tradition, I'm letting this 96-year-old man tell his story uninterrupted.
My mother said that no son of hers would ever fight in a war. In a way, I'm kind of glad that she never lived to see World War II, because both of her sons, her only children, both of her sons fought in that war. And when I took my veterans benefit from being in World War II and decided to get an education and go to college, was recalled for the Korean War. So I got to fight in two wars. I was sent to Korea on Christmas Eve, 1950. We were flown there we were flown there in commercial airplanes. What the Army had suffered, a tremendous defeat, the worst defeat in their history, in North Korea, in which those that weren't wounded froze to death, and it was just a terrible disaster. Now that happened in December of 1950. So they needed desperately, our President Truman desperately needed soldiers. So he re-grabbed everybody that was available. And since I was not married and didn't have any children, I was required to go back in the Army for the Korean War. So when I got there, they were hanging on to a very small perimeter called the Pusan perimeter around a major seaport in the south of Pusan. And they finally, with much struggling, their way back up toward the 31st parallel. My unit was an artillery unit in support of infantry units. Now, the American Army was organized in those days. They called it triangular organization, which meant everything was by threes. You had 3 squads formed a platoon. 3 platoons formed a company. 3 companies formed a battalion, like that. The reason I'm bringing up the threes is that sometime around mid-June, we began to receive the very first of the Ethiopian units called Kagnu. And we didn't quite know what to make of this at first. The Kagnu battalion was actually at first, we would get them in batches, maybe about 30 or 40 at a time. When they got up to approximately 100, they were put on the line and started fighting. And they then fought continuously from with with my unit in support of them continuously from, let us say, early or mid-June 1951, right on through to the end of the peace negotiations in 1953, 2 years later. And I think they stayed around a few years more, rebuilding roads and bridges. But of course, I was long gone by then. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about our thoughts of the Ethiopian battalion, because actually we had never seen people like this. When I said we, I mean most of us. Most of the Americans were familiar with the African Americans that they were familiar with, that were US citizens, were about the same size as the white Americans, but they were brown. They were brown people with shiny skin and about our size. When the first troops of the Cagnu battalion arrived, the Ethiopians, every one of them was a minimum of 6 feet tall. And they weren't stocky, short, stocky people. These were long, athletic people. And many of them had beards. Very few African Americans that we were familiar with ever wore beards, but at least a third of the Ethiopian soldiers had beards, maybe even more. They weren't brown and shiny. They were gray. Gray is the way I'll describe their color. And they were all long and lanky. They were like mountain people, like our West Virginians that we see here. So this was fascinating to us. And it also meant a very important thing. The color line that we still had in our overseas army was never applied. That prejudice against race never got applied that I observed ever to the Ethiopian soldiers. This is a morning report that my clerk filled out every day. We have to fill out this. This accounts for every man in your unit, whether they are available for duty or sick or wounded or what their disposition is. And you will note right here at the top, there is always a separate category for Negroes. I'm going to read a line right off to you. It says Headquarters, 7th Infantry Division, that's what we're talking about, Arty, Artillery, Race, Negro, Compound C. So in the American Army, this was a still and officially designated people of color, except the Ethiopians didn't fall under any of that category. They went right in as a separate nation, just like the Filipinos or South Americans from Colombia, or things from the Dutch and the French and so forth. I'd like to tell you about the first day that the members of the Cagnu Ethiopian Battalion went into combat. And this is when they had assembled. I don't think they quite had 100 yet. I think they were probably like about 90 or so, and eventually, of course, this would grow to 900 or 1,000 as they got together. But they wanted to, nobody had any idea what kind of soldiers they would make. They were trained, I think, by the British because they carried Enfield rifles, British Enfield rifles, and we made them use M1 rifles, our rifle. I never understood why, because it takes the exact same ammunition as the Enfield, so we could have left them have their own rifle that they knew the sights and understood and had trained with, instead of giving them a strange one. But that's typical American Army, is that we insisted that they have our equipment. And as for equipment, these guys had a pocket knife. Every Ethiopian soldier had the best pocket knife I ever saw. Now, American fellas love pocket knives. We all had pocket knives too, but ours weren't as good as theirs. So one of the things that our soldiers were always trying to do every time they would see an Ethiopian from the Kagnu battalion is try to trade knives with him, and they'd have to throw in something extra to boot, a specialty, to make a trade, because it's the best knife that any soldier ever carried, we thought. Their first day in combat, they're going to be now attached to the 32nd Infantry Division, which is part of our 7th, I didn't say that correctly, the 32nd Infantry Regiment, which is one of the 3 regiments of the 7th Division. My unit was to provide their artillery support. So the first day in combat, they were given 3 days of ammunition, and we were encamped on the lee side of a hill so that we didn't take any enemy fire. It would all go over. So the Ethiopians had to get on the actual firing line, had to go up the hill that sheltered us, then down into a valley, which we controlled, and then up another very steep ridge of hills. And on near the crest of that hill would be their fighting position. And then in front of them would be another very steep, short valley, which was no man's land. And then on the ridge line that paralleled the ridge that we occupied would be the North Korean and the Chinese. So the Ethiopians, I watched them all. They took their 3 days of ammunition. They had canned rations with them to eat, and they went up the first hill, and that's the last I saw of them. Until then, their job was to go down the valley, up the next hill, get themselves dug in and in place and ready to fight. The next day, at the end of the day, this is their first fighting day. At the end of the day, they sent the word back to send ammunition. We said, wait, you got 3 days of ammunition. What do you want more for? And they said, we got no ammunition. We shot it all up the first day. And I'm telling you this because that's an indicator of their assertiveness as fighting. They didn't just sit in their hole and wait till the enemy came to get them. They were out shooting anything that moved that was in the enemy lines. So we we got the ammunition and sent it up to them, and that's the way it was from then on. And as they would keep adding and adding more Ethiopian soldiers as they would arrive, we would always, as we would send up ammunition, the first question was always, is this Cagnew or our guys? If it was Cagnew, we sent up extra ammunition because they're going to shoot it. And it's ridiculous. What are we supposed to do? Go up and say, hey, you're all the way here from Ethiopia and you can't shoot your gun? No. So that was our initial introduction to the kind of soldier. So the value of the Cagnew Battalion was extra important to us for the following reason that nobody quite recognized at the time or understood. So let me explain how they fought and how the Cagnew Battalion, because of their Ethiopian training, has nothing to do with America, could defeat this more successfully than our troops, who were basically trained to fight the type of war that was in Europe in World War II. And that is this, that the American Army and the so-called United Nations forces had much superior equipment and much more equipment than the Chinese army. But the Chinese army had men. Now, the way that just the manpower, that they used manpower to defeat mechanized and mobile weaponry, was a very simple and old tactic. And that is, they would have, we have a long line, a defensive line of United Nations soldiers, and they are opposed by a long line of North Korean and Chinese soldiers. Now, we had very sophisticated airplanes that were trying to do the intelligence to find out where they were massing their armies and all that. When night comes, North Korean and Chinese saying through megaphones and on the radios, "We kill you, you die, soldier, you die, soldier." And they advance and they pressure. And you're in a firefight with people you can't see. It's night. They don't care that they lose people. What they're trying to do is push, probe, and somewhere there'll be a soft spot. When they find that soft spot, that's going to be tomorrow night's place. So they push against everything. Here and there, gives a little, they sense it's weak. Maybe soldiers ran and fled. Oh boy. So now they know where to mass the big troops and go. Our army, the American army, is formed of people who are drawn from all over this big nation. So I have in my unit, I've got maybe 20 Texans, and I've got 5 from Minnesota and 3 from Tennessee and 8 from Alabama. These are thousands of miles apart, and they speak with different accents, and they have different cultures and so forth. The Ethiopians who told us, they all told us that they were Haile Selassie's Imperial Guard, his private guard troops. They had a little pin that was the Lion of Judah. Before I came home, one of them gave me his little pin. And I don't know where it is right now. I treasure it. All the Cagnew Battalion was a unified mass. This was like having up on that line 600 brothers. I mean, family members. So there is no way. Their tactic is that they want to cut the opposing units with all the artillery support, flamethrowers, airplanes to bomb and all that. That's to bomb in the daytime. So that once you separate out a small group, by small groups, I'm talking about 30 to maybe 60. You want to cut out 30 to 60 people. And then the UN is going to have to replace those and bring them up, and it doesn't fit in the plan, and it's a big mess. Now, we did have situations in which they withdrew with us altogether, but they withdrew as a complete intact unit. And some of these withdrawals that we have, this is all part of a great tactic and strategy. The Ethiopians who told us, they all told us that they were 3 miles, 8 miles, 5 miles, you're working your way back. Well, the Cagnew would do the same, but as a complete intact unit. And this is for the division, a general order. And I make a notation here that the Cagnew, the Ethiopian battalion, was awarded the United States Distinguished Unit citation. This means they wear an emblem on their sleeve that has a wreath. Later on, during the peace talks, they get a second one from the Republic of Korea. But this is the American award. It was a year or earlier than the Korean, and it was awarded on September 22nd to 26th for their action on those days, which was a very bloody battle to capture these 2 hills. Now, I wrote that in recently. This was, I wrote in the 1951. Time after time, they were sent here to fight. That's why they shoot up all the ammunition. That's, to them, that is fighting. That's what they were sent for. I believe, don't know if it's true, that they spent over a month on a ship trying to get from Ethiopia to Korea. I think that was a very long trip for them. But you understand, that's preparation. What do you do for that month while you're waiting? You talk to the people. You get to know them. and this and that. So when they got off that boat, they're ready to fight. See? And they would, no matter how poor their English was, and many of them spoke perfect English, of course, absolutely perfect, but many didn't, they could all say that they are there to fight. There to fight. They picked up all their dead, but they wouldn't pick them up immediately because it was not until they finished fighting. And this was an admirable characteristic for my American soldiers to see people with that kind of determination. See, I mean, they're not Koreans. Nobody's taken their country away from them. They're just that they were sent by their emperor to go fight for their country, and boy, they did it.